What's up, guys? We're going to Juice Podcast. My name is Salman Ali, at Salman Ali NBA on Twitter. Here joined by Adam Spinella of the Box in One YouTube channel, podcast, newsletter. He's also the co-host of the Game Theory podcast with Sam Vecini, also a national NBA writer for SB Nation. And on top of all that, he coaches basketball himself at the Boys Latin School of Maryland. The man has a lot on his plate, so we are fortunate that he is giving us his time today. Adam, the NBA draft is 3 days away. Bradley Beal just got traded yesterday for a poo-poo platter. This is the stuff we live for. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. Thank you so much for having me on here. This is exactly right. It's that time of year where we're all kind of perking up. All eyes are on basketball, and this is what we do it for, is this kind of 1 week stretch here leading into the NBA draft, the most exciting time of the year.
It is. It is the most exciting time of the year. I'm very nervous, but I'm very excited at the same time. So let's start with the question I love to ask people in this field. Taking Victor Wembanyama out of it, because obviously he's a one of one, he's an anomaly. How good is this draft class relative to the past few seasons?
It's a very good draft class. It's very deep in a lot of different regards. I think that there are some really high-end bets that you can make in the early stages of the lottery that can really tether your franchise to finding that tentpole star. As you get into the second round, I think that there's a little bit of questions about depth beyond like the first 5 to 10 picks of that second round. But there is a huge wide open window between the back half of the lottery and like the 30 to 35 range where there could be so many different outcomes that happen on draft night. I think that makes for a deep draft class, but it's not necessarily one that you can really peg down and have a firm order outside of the lottery.
Right. So let's start at the top, because for the life of me, I have no idea what the hell Charlotte's going to do, and it doesn't seem like anybody else seems to know what they're going to do, including Charlotte. Why does it seem like they're taking so long to decide here? Like, the answer to me is pretty clear. Like, I think it's Scoot Henderson. I've certainly entertained the idea of Brandon Miller here for a little bit, but then I come back to my original position that it's Scoot and that this shouldn't really be much of a conversation, as much as it's become. What do you think is going on there?
So this is as much about optics and playing the game in terms of public perception as anything else. That the Charlotte Hornets want to keep all of their options open and on the table. So there really is no reason for them as an organization to rush out and have some sort of a public statement that shows who their guy is going to be at number 2. You never know up until the last minutes before they're actually throwing in their selection what type of trades they might be able to field or who's desperate enough to move into that number 2 spot. So from my vantage point here, this is them just maximizing leverage as best they can. If they truly don't know who they're going to draft and they're torn, I think that they're torn for the right reasons, that they see 2 really high caliber prospects who they could each tether their franchise to. If that's the case, not to say that there's a wrong choice they could make. I'm much more of a Scoot Henderson guy than I am a Brandon Miller guy. But I think it's very defensible for them to take Brandon Miller at number 2 based on the proven production, the size that he brings to the table, and just the fit that he would have next to LaMelo Ball, one of their potential stars that they've already drafted.
If they're at the point where they consider Brandon Miller and Scoot Henderson like a hair difference, like they're very close, then I can understand the idea of incorporating fit on the roster as part of the equation. If it's any other reason, I hope it's not. Like I really hope that they're doing it the way you said it, that they consider these guys to be very strong candidates here at number 2, and that they're deciding between the 2. So from watching / reading your big board and mock draft content, it seems like you and I are on the same page in terms of the top 3. In some order, it's going to be Wemby, Scoot, and Miller. At number 4, this draft gets tough, at least for me. I have a preference here, but I don't envy the position the Rockets are in. I personally believe the tier after Scoot Henderson contains Brandon Miller, Amen Thompson, and I've recently been persuaded that Cam Whitmore belongs here too. I know in your mock draft you have Houston taking Whitmore, and that buzz is really starting to pick up. Is that who you think they should draft?
No, if I were in Houston's shoes, I would be going after Amen Thompson. I think that he's a better fit skill-wise for what this roster really needs, and I do have him actually in a different tier of prospect, so to speak, than a guy like Cam Whitmore. But the mock drafts are really more about buzz and intel and things that I'm hearing around the league, which seems like we're hearing those same things starting to heat up around the Rockets, maybe having interest in Whitmore at number 4. But I know those reports and those rumblings change on a day-to-day basis. If it were me, I would go in the direction of Amen Thompson.
Yeah, I'm with you. In terms of raw athletic ability, like I think Amen is a hedge ahead, but not by much. Like they're pretty close because Cam Whitmore is a freak athlete in his own right. Like the game processing though, and the playmaking ability that the Thompson twins, more specifically Amen, it feels so instinctual, and that to me is what makes him special. Like whenever you have that natural ability to play make for others, it's just different than when you have to teach it. Right? Like you can teach playmaking, but it's not going to be the same as if it's just like within you. Like you have it coming into the league. That makes you like a special level of processor. And the Rockets badly need someone who's going to stir the drink for them. And when you draft someone like Whitmore, in my opinion, the ball is just going to get sticky when you already have guys like Jalen Green, KPJ, Josh Christopher, and frankly, Jabari Smith isn't a great ball mover either. So unless you're willing to go, like, put all your playmaking eggs in the Alperen Sengun basket, I want the Rockets to take another bet at a high level playmaker. Excuse me. Like, I just think it's the right way to go. Is that kind of your, analysis here? Like, you want them to go for a playmaker next to Jalen Green?
I think that a playmaker is important. Like, look, at the 4th pick, you're still taking a swing for the fences on the best long-term player that you can get. And in my estimation, that's still Amen Thompson ahead of a guy like Cam Whitmore. But the fit, it is so much cleaner, where having an injection of athleticism and playmaking really brings out the best in the young players the Rockets have already assembled on this roster. I love the idea of Amen Thompson and Jalen Green as the most athletic backcourt in the NBA 2, 3, 4 years from now. And more than anything with Amen, you mentioned the feel and the processing speed. He has 2 elite traits. The first is his ability to get into the lane. The second is the ability to make the right decision once he gets into the lane. He's a very good finisher with craft around the basket. When he draws multiple defenders, he throws proactive skip passes out of the lane and finds open shooters around him. It just simplifies everybody else's role. And I think for the Rockets, a guy like Jabari Smith would really, really pop playing next to somebody like Amen Thompson.
Yeah, from a scouting perspective, how tough was it for you to watch Overtime Elite? Because, like, I got to be honest, like, watching it for me, like, I don't even do this for a living, right? I've just been, keeping up with the past couple of drafts. It was a really, really tough watch for me. Like, not in the sense that these guys were not talented. It just felt more like everything was transition. Like, almost everything was transition. And it felt very... I'm about to use a term here. I don't mean it to be derogatory, but it felt very high school varsity, like-ish. Like, that's how it felt, like, just watching it. And that's not to say that this wasn't a good environment. It just felt very difficult for me to gauge his talent level relative to some of his peers, like a Brandon Miller. But at the same time, just seeing his athleticism, especially in that transition, in that open floor, like, that's an even playing field. You're going to play transition basketball the same way you are here anywhere else. And he looked just ridiculous, especially when the defenders came over and he was able to make that quick pass. Like, it felt like some of his teammates weren't even ready for some of these passes. Like, the ball would just slip out of their hands. And it's like, some of that is like, yeah, he probably needs to slow down the ball when he's making that pass. But also some of it just felt like, yeah, these guys aren't ready for the pass. Like, these guys don't even see that they're open. They don't realize it yet. And Amen does. Is that kind of like what you felt like when you were watching this tape? Like, you felt like, was this a tough watch? Was this really hard to evaluate for yourself?
I mean, there's always challenges in evaluating a new level of basketball, which fits somewhere above like AAU and high school level of talent, but beneath college in terms of the organization that it brings to the table. At least for some of us who've been doing this for a long period of time, we have exposures to AAU basketball. A lot of scouts don't just watch college and focus on the level immediately prior to coming to the NBA. So there's a lot of context that you can tap into to try to figure out what you're evaluating. I think the biggest challenge is that the Overtime Elite program had a lot more like bigger athletes and not a lot of guys who could space the floor properly. So it very much felt like for these two Thompson twins, who are more drivers and slashers and not guys who take a ton of jump shots, they were operating against a defense that was really designed to thwart them and to pack in the lane without a ton of great options for kickouts. So I think they should be lauded for making the right basketball play a lot of the time, and their athleticism, to me, stands out as even more impressive given that context, but it did make for some sloppy moments on film.
So if you and I can see that kind of upside, right, that upside of being a playmaker with Amen, right, and for us, it's pretty clear that that's who the Rockets should go for. What's driving this Cam Whitmore talk, right? Like, because I'm hearing it a lot, especially from particularly the analytics community. Like, they seem to really like him in the projection models. And your partner on the podcast, Sam Vecini, had him number 3 on his big board. Is it just that he's 18 years old? Like, he is significantly younger than Amen, 18 months, if I remember correctly. And is it just that, or is it like something else that we're not seeing? I did see that he finished at the rim at a very high level, Cam Whitmore, and his body is just, he uses his body really well. Like, he really bullies guys at the college level, which I thought was impressive, but still not enough for me to put him over Amen. Like, what to you was driving all this?
So they're very different types of players and even different types of athletes. Amen is a much more quick twitch guy with the ball in his hands who can change speeds, change levels, and weave in and out of traffic. Cam Whitmore is just a guy that's going to run you over. Not a point guard or somebody that you would want to play with the ball in his hands for long periods of time, but is capable of being a high-level scorer because of the jump shot. To me, it's not just the age difference between the two, but it's the projectability of the jump shot moving forward, which is important for playing off ball and for how you're guarded on the perimeter in a playoff series. So Whitmore has done a fantastic job over the last 18 months of adding a reliable jumper to his arsenal. Not quite as consistent in the mid-range for self-creation right now, but over 40% on his catch-and-shoot looks from 3 this past year. The mechanics look really smooth when he has time. He's got to do a lot of cleaning up of the decisions that he's made. And I'm very familiar with Whitmore. I actually coached against him twice when he was a senior in high school. He plays in the same league that I coach in right now. So I've been following Whitmore for a long period of time, and the real strides that he's taken as a jump shooter, they feel legitimate. The form that he shoots them with is very, very strong. But like you mentioned earlier, it's the feel and the decision-making. I think the difference between the two is not just positionally. Would you rather have a lead guard or a power wing? It's what do you value more in a raw prospect coming into the league? Somebody who's got elite playmaking, feel, and decision-making, or somebody who combines power and athleticism with an already somewhat proven jump shot?
The jumper is a concern for me when I watch Amen, right? Like, it's not just that it's not going in, it's that there's going to need to be a lot of reconstruction here in terms of the form. The hitch specifically is pretty pronounced, and I think that is a reasonable case to have Whitmore above Amen. But I still, again, I just value that processing ability that much more. When you look at a prospect like Amen, right, with the shooting mechanics that he has, does it almost make you, like, which way do you lean on this? When the mechanics are that bad and the percentages are that bad, does it make you more confident that you can improve them because you're pretty much starting from scratch in terms of the mechanics standpoint? Or does it make you a little discouraged that you have to start from scratch? Because, like, for me, it is discouraging, but I also wonder, like, if these were his percentages and he had, like, a good-looking stroke, like, that would be like, oh, my God, like, how do you convince him, like, that this is something that you have to really work at?
Well, I just find it really fascinating how the pendulum continues to swing back and forth in the conversation about shooting development. Years ago, it used to be like you can either shoot or you can't. Let's not waste our time trying to teach that in the NBA. Now it has very much flipped on its head and swung completely the other direction, where I think everybody assumes that if you start somebody from scratch, you can eventually turn them into a really good shooter. That's a difficult thing to do.
Yeah.
Particularly with a 20-year-old guy like Amen Thompson, who's coming in with so much muscle memory already built out from the ways that he has shot in the past. So I don't believe that this is going to be a simple fix. I don't look at somebody who has a lot of issues and say, hey, let's just start from scratch. At least he'll be receptive to overhauling the form. Like, you always want guys who have touch and consistency with both their base and their follow-through. Amen doesn't have any of those things, so it is going to be a complete rebuild. That said, what I have seen during this pre-draft process in terms of some of the mechanics shows that there have been a few tweaks that have been made just to get him passable in the short term, to try to build that muscle memory in a positive way, and then they can rework to make the jump shot a little bit faster in the long run. So I think he's on the right developmental trajectory right now. It's just going to be a very long road for him to get up to league average as a shooter.
It is consistently, in my opinion, the hardest thing to teach a young player, especially somebody, as you said, who's played for a while, right? Like they have a certain level of confidence, even if it's not going in at the rate you would like it to. They have a certain level of confidence in that jumper. You can go through several different practices with the player, and then he'll go into game time and he'll go right back to what he was used to doing. Not because he's like trying to defy you or anything, but just it's just natural for him, and you gotta make him feel a little bit awkward at first before it feels comfortable. I 100% agree. Like that is something that is difficult, really, really difficult to improve. So that is something the Rockets have to weigh here. So let's move on to the 20th pick. What I've noticed here is that because guys like Bilal Coulibaly, Kobe Buffkin, and Taylor Hendricks are rising as we get closer to the draft, I'm seeing like high upside guys like Keontae George, Cason Wallace, Derek Lively, and Grady Dick. Like those are the guys that seem to be falling. I'm not sure if you're going to get like a Grady Dick falling all the way to you at 20, but as a Rockets fan, I got to be honest, it does make me feel excited at the prospect of at least one of these guys might fall to you, because I'd rather bet on somebody like that than, like Jet Howard's nice, right? Like no offense, I like Jet Howard, right? Like the guy can really shoot the basketball, but I don't quite know what else he can do. And if they keep the pick, which is what I said last week, I'm doubtful that they want to add another young guy to their roster. But if they do, who do you like for Houston in this range? Like what skill sets or prospects do you think they should target?
Yeah, I mean, if they keep this pick, it's going to depend heavily on which player or what type of direction they go with the number 4 overall selection, right? So if they get Amen Thompson at number 4, I think Keontae George creates a complete overlap of skill sets in different areas and wouldn't make him the right type of gamble. So this mid to late first round area has a lot of these scoring-minded combo guards or smaller wings that could be available. So Keontae George is one of them. Nick Smith out of Arkansas, Dariq Whitehead out of Duke, Bryce Sensabaugh from Ohio State. Like there are a lot of these guys in that range who could be seen as the highest upside swing available, but it also feels like there's just too much overlap positionally between them, Jalen Green, and Amen Thompson in some regard. There's only one ball that's going to be in Houston, regardless of whoever they draft. They need to find guys who provide that off-ball spacing. So if I were the Rockets, I would be looking a lot more towards some of the lower usage players who have a decent upside, but just provide that really positive floor spacing. I think that's where Jet Howard's name continues to come up a lot for Houston right now, that it's less about the things he doesn't do on the floor. And I agree he's a little bit one-dimensional because he doesn't put the ball on the floor a ton and isn't a great athlete on defense. But the value he provides just as a credible threat to space the floor can create so much more room for Amen Thompson to be the best version of Amen Thompson. So I hate viewing the draft in terms of fit because you always want to take the best long-term guy for your organization. But who that guy is at 20 drastically changes based on who you draft at number 4 and the long-term vision for how all of the pieces come together. So I would look at a guy like Jet Howard there. I think Olivier Maxence Prosper out of Marquette is one name who I've started to get really high on over the last couple of weeks here, just as a 3-and-D type of wing in that prototypical mold. I think there are a lot of options that the Rockets could go here.
So let's talk about Houston's on-roster prospects before I let you go, because I really feel like this young core is difficult to evaluate because of everything they've gone through these past 3 years. There's just a lot of guys meshed into a roster, without regard to fit. But I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily when you're starting a rebuild. But also, they had a bunch of guys playing in front of them, so they have a tough time getting onto the floor. But what do you think of their young core? How do you feel that they've gone about some of these draft decisions these past few years?
So I've continued to describe it as Houston is in the talent accumulation phase. That when they started this rebuild, they just need to get as many good basketball players as possible and not always worry about how they fit together. And I think we've seen some of the challenges of that approach on court the last couple of years. They've got no veteran leadership on the court or in the locker room, and a bunch of young guys trying to figure out where their role is and how everybody fits together. As Houston goes deeper into this process of trying to reformat and reshape the roster around some of the young talent that they've accumulated, I think they need to be a little bit more cognizant of that fit and role identification for these guys. And that's something that new coach Ime Udoka does a fantastic job of. He's very blunt about letting guys on his team know what the expectations are for them, what their role is, how they fit into winning, and if they're not willing to do that, that their minutes are going to diminish. So I really liked Jalen Green and the process behind that pick a couple years ago. I wonder if he and Alperen Sengun and another primary threat like Amen Thompson, how they all kind of fit together, because everyone seems to want the ball in their hands a little bit more. But I think there are ways to tie all of those pieces together and make them really work. And that's where Jabari Smith, even though he had a little bit of an underwhelming rookie year, is the right type of connective piece in theory, because he just provides a ton of value as a floor spacer. And I know we didn't see it this past year under that last Rockets coaching regime with Steven Silas, but he can do a lot of different things for your playbook in pick and pop actions, coming off of screens, just in layering things in different ways that create gravity to open up the lane for guys like Jalen Green, Alperen Sengun, and whoever else to put pressure on the basket. So I think there is a potential fit that the Rockets could salvage with all of these guys. It just hasn't been a very smooth process thus far.
So you're not someone who was concerned by Jabari's rookie season?
Concern might be a little bit too strong of a word. I think he's going to be fine. I think it's very clear that he's probably not going to be a number one, number two, or maybe even a number three option for an offense long term. But he's still a valuable winning piece because he competes on defense. He is long and has positional size. And we've seen him be able to shoot in long stretches before. He's going to be okay.
Okay, so I want to end on sort of a dumb but fun question. I did send you this ahead of time, so you did have a little bit of a heads up. I want you to rank the following 5 assets in order in terms of upside. Jalen Green, Alperen Sengun, Jabari Smith, Tari Eason, and lastly, kind of a curveball, but the 4th overall pick this year. I know we don't know what that's going to be yet. We kind of have some sort of idea who's going to be there, and that's kind of why I want to put it in there.
Yeah, so I would put Jalen Green at number 1, and I know that might seem like a little bit controversial when I am so glowing over a lot of the prospects that could be available at number 4 overall here, but you always take the proven commodity a little bit more than somebody who's very unproven as a draft prospect. So I have Jalen Green number 1 for that. I would have the 4th pick as the second most valuable asset for the Houston Rockets. Probably Jabari 3, Sengun 4, and then Tari Eason number 5.
Okay, that's interesting. So I have a completely different order here, but I do want to start with the question. How receptive are you to the idea that Alperen Sengun is actually the most valuable asset on this roster?
If you can make an argument for it, I can be receptive to anything.
So here's my argument. I think to date he has the best scoring numbers in terms of efficiency, right? Like he seems to score the ball at a much more efficient clip than Jalen Green, than Tari Eason, and then Jabari Smith to start. And the playmaking is what really makes everyone excited about him. Like he has eyes on the back of his head. He made some of it's not just the flashy passes. It's just that he has a willingness to find others, and he's really adept at finding cutters and shooters. And that, to me, at least puts the seed in my head that he could possibly be an offensive hub type guy. And as much as I like Jalen Green, he hasn't really been very efficient yet, and he hasn't shown that he can be kind of a hub on offense. You know, basically the playmaking the concerns are a little, or I think they're warranted. Like I think he has. He's not a guy who's like selfish, but I don't think it's natural for him. It's very much like Devin Booker coming into the league. You have to teach it for him, and that's kind of why I think when you have someone like Sengun with a base of that strong of a playmaker and that efficient of a scoring against NBA level bigs, I mean, it makes me very, very excited. The defensive concerns are real, but that's kind of why I tend to believe, as of right now, I have him a hair above Jalen Green as the best prospect on this roster. Did I make a strong enough argument?
I think feel is certainly something that's really important and impactful. I tend not to care too much about the efficiency numbers for young players on younger teams because particularly guys like Jalen Green who are carrying that number one scoring mantle, to be efficient in that role as a teenager or a young guy in the league is borderline impossible. It's really, really difficult to do. So I think for me, the difference comes in self-creation, that you still, in order to win playoff games, need somebody that can go out there against a really strong defender and create their own shot. That Sengun is a really good offensive hub in the ways that he can be utilized, but I don't necessarily believe in him as a late clock option. And then I think that the big man position is always going to be built around what type of defensive impact you can provide. That in order to offset being a poor defender, you've got to be so great on the offensive end, and that just raises the bar a little bit too high for me to feel comfortable with lofting on a young prospect. I think Sengun, there's rumors about him continuing to grow a little bit more. Like with time, he can become a functional defender, and if he does that, I would expect to be really, really high on him in the long term. But right now, I think that there are too many replacement-level big men in the league who can provide adequate defense that I would rather take a swing on a high-upside, late-clock creator in a guy like Jalen Green.
I think that's reasonable. If he really did grow 2 inches over the summer, I'm not sure what I'm going to do with myself. Really, that was one of my biggest concerns for him defensively. It's like he is like 6'9" right now, and he's having to defend these giant bigs, and also like be pretty. I mean, like if you're gonna be this kind of big, you're gonna have to have some switchability, not like you don't have to be Clint Capella out there, but you have to have a little bit of being able to run with the punches a little bit. So those do concern me. But if he's tall, like if you have a legit 7-footer in Alperen Sengun or like a 6'11" frame, I'm a lot more optimistic about what he can be defensively. But again, we haven't seen him yet. No one's measured him so far. This is word of mouth. Basically, Josh Christopher on a podcast is what we're going off of. So yeah, I mean we'll see. I gotta say, Tari Eason last year was someone who I didn't think was that. I didn't see the upside with him, to be honest. Like I thought he was a kind of a 3-and-D guy, but what he showed last year in the limited minutes that he had, to me, just my opinion, if I was a head coach of that team, I might have started Tari Eason at the end of the season over Jabari Smith, just because of how well he was playing relative to how well Jabari was playing. I understand why they did what they did. I understand why you can't have the number 3 overall pick come off the bench, and I understand that long term they see Jabari as a bigger part of their future. I kind of want Ime to go into next season with an earn your rotation spot, earn your minutes kind of like mentality. I want the entire starting lineup to be up for grabs, and I think it might lead to more healthy player development. How did you see Tari Eason's place on this team last year?
So I'll admit, I didn't watch a ton of Houston Rockets basketball last season. Checked out a lot more of the mini games, things that I could find up on Synergy, and just some interesting moments when I caught them. But I've always been a believer that floor spacing is going to be always more valuable than finding guys who are head-down drivers and slashers. And not to say that Tari Eason hasn't continued to grow and evolve as a three-point shooter, but his primary role coming into the NBA was a little bit more as that mismatch driver, want to put my head down and go to the basket guy. There's only one basketball on a court. Mm-hmm. You've got 5 guys to be able to balance. At any given time, you need 4 of them to provide value when they don't have the ball in their hands. So I still remain a little bit higher on Jabari Smith's role, just in terms of what the threat of him as a shooter provides for everybody else. I see a lot of upside for Tari Eason, and I saw it a year ago before he was drafted. I think a lot of how he continues to put that upside together is built on buying into being a defensive stopper at multiple positions, continuing to grow as a floor spacer and somebody who's a consistent catch-and-shoot threat, and then finding the right lineups and opportunities in which he can pick his spots as a downhill rim attack guy. And if he can do that and be a real mismatch option, he's going to be a very consistent member of the rotation for Houston for a long period of time.
Fair enough. Listen, you've eased some of my concerns about Jabari on this podcast. Like, I got to be honest, I like last year did concern me. Like, I was like, this guy was the number 3 overall pick. His greatest skill was 3-point shooting, and he wasn't doing that well this last year. So I was a little concerned, but you did talk me off the ledge a little bit. By the way, my order was Alperen Sengun, Jalen Green, 4th overall pick, Jabari Smith, and Tari Eason. After the top 2, wasn't that different from yours. But I am very excited about this young core. I'd like to see, what happens on Thursday. Like, I'm very, very excited, as I'm sure are you. Tell the people where we can read your stuff, watch your stuff, listen to your stuff.
Well, thank you again for having me on. I always love coming and talking about the Houston Rockets. Anybody who wants to follow my work can find my Twitter page at @theboxand1_. That's where I link out to everything else on the internet. My Substack page, theboxand1.substack.com, has full written scouting reports on every player within my top 50 at this point, as well as my YouTube channel, which is just my name, Adam Spinella, featuring full-length scouting report videos to go with them.
I'm sure Rockets fans are very familiar with your content if they spend any time on YouTube. Thank you so much for coming on, Adam. I'll talk to you down the road.
All right, thank you again.